Hi friends, I'm really glad you're taking time to think a little bit more deeply about this whole idea of coaching. Clearly, the idea of coaching is not something that can be contained in one book, one video, or even one class. It's an area that is vast beyond any one of those limited modalities of learning. So obviously we're not going to be able to unpack everything. I'm not sure that any one person could unpack everything about coaching. Lots of books about it, and I'm sure you've read some of them. But I am glad that you're taking time just to be with me and thinking through some principles, some deeper principles about the whole idea of coaching, especially as you engage with people that perhaps are following you or that you're investing in, all for the good of the organizational benefit, and especially in nonprofit or Christian church environments. So thanks for taking the time. I'm hoping that we can spend a few minutes here just unpacking a few things that can be developed further in ongoing resources that will be made available to you, both through training as a coach, through seminars for coaches, and also in walking with you if you are a coach and working with other people in helping them to flourish. So I'm glad you've joined me. I'd like to spend some time talking with you about this subject. And to begin with, let me say that the term coaching in and of itself has a diversity of meanings. And it depends on the circumstance what we mean by that term. If we go into the environment of team sports, for example, the term coaching means that the coach tells people what to do and how to do it to achieve exact outcomes. So you can imagine, for example, a football coach who is the head coach of a football team. That coach certainly is going to have helpers, but that coach is going to tell the players what to do and even how to do it so that they can score points. Or a basketball coach, or a baseball coach, or any team sports. They're pretty tightly controlling not only the person, but the method and the goal to achieve the outcomes. So there's a high degree of control in team sports when it comes to coaching. So when you hear the word coaching and you're a member of a team sport, that's kind of what you hear it to be. You go to individual sports, a coach is very different, where the coach isn't going to control everything, but the coach is going to guide and instruct and is going to provide pointers about what to do, and then going to release and observe how the individual performs. Imagine the tennis coach who works hard in terms of physical training and stamina and then methodology and provides pointers and guidance. But then when it comes time to perform, that coach has to release the player to do what she or he thinks is best in the moment. And they sit in the grandstands and watch the player perform. That's a different kind of coaching. And then we come to the arena of life and leadership. And this environment, coaching means something different. Coaching means listening, advising, responding, and encouraging someone in the pursuit of their own journey of formation, leadership, and living. And occasionally providing words that refine what they're talking about or deducing principles out of circumstances. You see, it's a very different feel than the coach of a team sport or a coach of an individual sport. Here, the coach is providing almost partnership in journeying along the way, all to the end of formation. So the team coach is focused on outcomes. The individual sport coach is really focusing on development of skill. And in life and leadership, the coaching here, we're focusing on formation. So as we think about coaching in that environment, then the question is, what are the features that are required? Well, there are three particular ones that I want to highlight for you that are required for an effective coach in the arena of life and leadership. First of all, is a good assessment of what is extant. In other words, what am I dealing with? What is real? What is my defined reality right now? What are the tools that I have that I'm working with now? A second factor that needs to be considered is an understanding of the possibilities. This is where capacity comes in. A coach has to be able to understand what kind of capacity might be in the person that they're coaching, or what kind of limitations to those capacities might exist in the circumstances or in the innate ability or skill of the person. And a third, good coaching requires a clear view of a preferred future. In other words, that hopeful image of what this person can become and the possibilities, and it gives a sparkle to the eye and a smile to the face and a joy to the heart that this person could really grow into and form into another level of leadership and living. Those are necessary for effective coaches in the arena of life and leadership. I want to talk to you about two general categories then that might help you in thinking about being a coach, or at least understanding what coaches need to be concerned about. And the first is in the area of priorities. What priorities do coaches need to be focusing on? And the second in the area of process. And that's a little briefer, and it can adjust depending on the circumstances. But first, let me unpack some of these priorities. First of all, a good coach has to be attentive to the person that's in front of you. Not just the circumstance, but the person. That is your number one priority, is the person that you're working with. And in respect to that person, we need to be concerned about the identity formation of that person. Who am I, anyway? What is my core identity, and how is my identity shaped? You see, focusing on identity formation. Also in the person, focusing on the vocation or the calling. What is the source of passion that drives everything and gives value to a call? What is it that is energizing this person? What is the outflow of that identity through a vocational call? Now, there's a whole other area where I've talked about these two things, identity, through a whole video series on identity formation and in a book called The Integrity Factor. And then addressing the question of vocation, it's much more than a career, and it's certainly not equated with a job. Those are part and are related, but they're not synonymous with a vocation. And I talk about that in other areas, but suffice it to say that when you focus on the identity formation of a person and how that flows out of them in their vocation, we're talking about who am I and what is the passion that motivates me and shapes my call. A third area in focusing on the person is on their gifting. What are they good at? What are their talents? What are their God-given gifts? How has God made them to be good in particular areas? Not everybody's good at everything. So what are the particular gifts? Aligning with my calling what I'm good at, you see. And a fourth area in focusing on the person is the personality. Where do I fit? Some personalities just don't fit in certain places. An extroverted, gregarious person is probably not going to fit very well in a laboratory in the basement of the science building, working by themselves all the time, late into the night to discover. You see, personality is a big deal in fit. So we want to focus on the person in those four aspects. A second area to be attentive to is the context. What is the context in which this person that I'm coaching is really working in? What's the organizational condition? Is it static? Is it dynamic? Is it declining? Is it growing? And what are the measures that are used for this person in assessing whether or not they are meeting the expectations of that organization? Is it an empowering condition? Is it a disempowering condition? Is it a fear-based environment? What is the organizational condition that the people are working in? And a coach has to be attentive to that and sometimes be able to pick up on that through non-directive kind of signals or observations that you may observe. And secondly, in the context, we want to know what are the purpose, mission, and values of this organization in which this person is working. Because those are coming out of the institutional identity of the corporation or of the organization or of the church. And where those purpose, mission, and values are very, very clear, it will be easier to help a person align with what those are and kind of put them on like a coat so that it fits. So a coach is going to have to be really attentive to the organizational condition, specifically in the area of purpose, mission, and values. And that helps to describe the context in which the person that you're coaching is working. And a third area in context is the corporate culture. I've addressed that briefly, but corporate culture is the silent killer of effective leadership. When we miss the signs of corporate culture, we are easily going to fall prey to great failure or frustration, no matter how good a leader we might be. So a coach needs to be very attentive to the context, particularly in this case, to the corporate culture or the environment. Is it disempowering? Is it fear-based? Is it controlling? Is it empowering? Are people given permission or are they constrained? You see, that corporate culture will create an environment in which a leader can flourish or may shrink and dry up. So a coach has to be very attentive to that in terms of context. A third area in focusing our attention as coaches in the area of co-laborers, that is, the team, other people that are working with this person. You're coaching someone or you are a person being coached, and a coach needs to really understand the team aspect. Who are the other people you're working with? And what is the nature of those relationships? What are the relational dynamics? Is there high relational trust? Is there distrust? Is there tension? Is there synergy? Is there a common vision? Is there an understanding that we have each other's backs? You see, co-laborers are really important in helping a person flourish as an effective leader. Another area in the area of co-laboring is communication. How do people in this environment communicate with each other? And is it clear? Is it unclear? Is it only by written memos? Is it by quick shorthand? Is it by flyby communication? Or do we sit down and have regular times of conversation? Is there freedom to communicate? You see, being attentive to the dynamic of co-laborers, and particularly this subpoint of communications, is really important for a coach to be attentive to. And lastly, when it comes to co-laborers, a third subpoint would be in the area of shared values. Shared values and a shared mission. Do we as a team have a common sense of what we value most and we're willing to compromise on, or we're willing to go to the wall for, or we're willing to give and take with one another? Is there a sense of synergy and one mind in achieving what we're setting out to achieve? So the effective coach is going to be very attentive to these priorities of person, of context, and of co-laborers in helping a particular person grow in their leadership effectiveness. A second area of priorities, though, beyond being attentive to certain priorities, is coaches have to work through certain means in order to live out those priorities. And coaches are going to work through, first of all, relational trust. There has to be a trusting relationship between a coach and a person who's needing help. There has to be open communication. That builds trust. There has to be mutuality. In other words, I have to trust a person, and that person has to trust me. You know, I've had many people come to me and say, would you mentor me? Well, I understand what that means, but I want to make sure that they understand how I'm going to approach this. My answer often is no. But I will be your friend, and I will walk with you, and I will offer anything that I have to help you flourish and find fulfillment in your leadership. You see, there has to be that kind of level of open communication, and there has to be that understanding of mutuality. Because frankly, if I'm working with you and you and I are meeting once a month or every 2 weeks and we're spending 2 hours talking, you can be sure that I'm learning an awful lot from you. Now, the relationship may be that you may see me as a coach, but I have to be humble enough and mutual with you enough to be able to be open to what God may have for me to understand about my own leadership and my context and my journey through your life. That's a kingdom principle where we submit to one another as unto the Lord. And so that mutuality is really important in relational trust, open communication, relational trust, and thirdly in trust is shared experiences. You can be sure that if a coach walks with you or you walk with another person as a coach, through a period of time, you're going to have experiences that you're going to share with one another. Whether that happens to be confronting a resistant board or even having regular lunches together and circumstances happen, you're going to have shared experiences, and those become vitally important in building relational trust between a coach and a leader. A second area that coaches work through, though, is the area of personal focus. I say this again almost as a reiteration of what I said earlier in terms of priorities, because the real focus of a coach cannot be just on the outcome and production. It really does have to be on the priority of the individual flourishing. That's the personal focus that a coach has to have. My priority cannot be on making sure that so many widgets are being produced when you start doing your work. My priority has to be, I want to make sure that you as a person are growing and flourishing as a person first and as a leader. So I need to work through that personal focus. Second, under personal focus, is this idea of focusing on the who more than the what. And that's just a different way of saying that you as the leader are the one that's going to be accomplishing things. So I'm more interested in how you are, in who you are, and how well you engage with your circumstances than I am on your skill sets. You can read a book and learn how to make a decision. I can help you with that. You can read a book or go to a seminar on how to diffuse confrontation. People can help you with that. But fundamentally, a coach is going to be focused on you as a person and secondarily on helping you develop particular skills. Thirdly, in the area of personal focus, is the balance between your character and your competence. Now, this one is one that I think I've done a whole video series on, but this one is really important because effective leadership is made up both of competence, how well you do a thing, and character, the condition of your being, which gives rise to your behavior and your abilities. And the balance between those two things is going to develop into a worthy leader. Competence alone is not sufficient, and character alone is not sufficient. Competence without character will lead to arrogance. Character without competence will lead to irrelevance. So these two things are woven together necessarily to develop effective leaders who flourish, both in terms of who they are in their character and how well they perform in their skill and competence. That goes back to the iceberg, the bottom of the iceberg and the top of the iceberg that I've talked about in the integrity factor, and you may be familiar with that. So a coach works through relational trust and the three subpoints I mentioned there, through personal focus, and thirdly, through circumstantial opportunities. So rather than a coach meeting with you or you meeting with someone and bringing this prescription or this prescribed outline or checklist of things to do, the coach begins with the circumstances that you are confronted with now. What is it that's happening in your life and in your leadership situation right now? And then from that, I want to use those existing circumstances to help move you along in your effectiveness as a leader. So the focus on circumstantial opportunities is really important because you use those circumstances to learn and to grow. Secondly, then, under that, the coach is going to help you respond to those circumstances in a way that's productive. And thirdly, then, as you learn to respond to those circumstances in a way that's productive, the coach helps to tease out of those circumstances transcendent principles that become anchor points for you for future situations. So out of those individual circumstantial opportunities, the coach needs to help a person exact timeless truths or timeless principles that become the foundation for future leadership. And it's kind of like building the stair steps. Circumstances that we observe, we help people respond to, we extract timeless principles, and that creates the next step on which a leader can stand to then reach higher and move higher and become more and more effective, both in their own personal development as well as in their effectiveness in their leadership function. So those priorities really are important. And the means, the process, then, is the next thing I want to spend time talking briefly with you about. And this is where we get into a little bit more of the how-tos or the specifics. The process for a coach working with a person is going to be different depending on the person, especially if we are person-focused in our work with people and we're using circumstantial situations to derive timeless lessons. But what we want to do in this process, first of all, is to observe and identify principles that are going to enhance the personal development in key areas. Remember earlier in the priorities, I said that we want to focus on the person, not just for developmental reasons, but for formational reasons. Now we're talking about the process. So we've gone from focusing on formation now to helping people develop. And that development that we want to help people with is going to be in all the areas we've already touched on. For example, personal identity formation, vocation and calling, gifting and abilities, personality and passion. We want to help a person grow in all of those areas. So sometimes it's going to be in formation of their own identity, and sometimes it's going to be in the skill of how to do something. Always with an eye on the priority of person before problem, and secondly, using every circumstance as a learning opportunity to build principles that can guide them in the future. So we talk in terms of process, in terms of structure. What kind of structure do we want to use? Well, it has to be a structure that reflects the rhythms, the personal rhythms of the leader. In other words, what is the normal pattern of life for this particular leader? Don't try to change the normal rhythms, because those are like well-worn paths that have developed, and they have either become convenient, sometimes they need to be changed, but for the most part, healthy leaders, good leaders, understand the rhythms of their life, of balancing their role as a leader and their family life and their leisure and their social life. They understand those. So the process and the structure of coaching needs to reflect the rhythms that are in place. Sometimes those will be adjusted, but by and large, they're not going to change all that much. Mostly protecting the family priorities, the marriage and the family, which are top priority. Secondly, the structure needs to have regular points of meaningful conversation. That may take the form of a weekly or bi-weekly or even monthly. It may be in person, it may be virtual, but there's got to be regular points of conversation where some of these other things can come up and you can begin to have those shared experiences. Thirdly, there needs to be substantial time. Time to probe, not just a quick report and then check off and go on, but to be able to probe. A coach needs to be able to stop and say, wait a minute, what do you mean by that? Or that doesn't make sense. Or explain that further for me so that I can reflect with you on that. There has to be sufficient time to probe. That may mean a couple hours each time you get together and explore so that there's time for dialogue and the mutuality that I referenced earlier under some of the priorities. And my suggestion is that there be every few months, maybe a half-day sit-down slow talk time. A lot of times we've developed this pattern of rapid speech. I mean, we even listen to podcasts at 1.5 speed or 2 times the normal speed because we can process that quickly. But in the formation of leaders, in helping leaders to grow in some of the areas I've mentioned of identity and vocation and gifting and passion, there has to be time to slow the RPMs and have what I call slow talk. So every few months, maybe, time over coffee for half a day or a getaway, and allowing the conversation to take its natural course, to explore, to reflect, and to invest in. Those are some of the suggestions for structure. Now, I don't want to give you specific program for how to structure a coaching time. That should be determined between the two people, the two parties, in a manner that's natural for their personalities, their life, their rhythms, their priorities, and their nature. But these are 4 key things that I think are important. Secondly, every encounter then, that might be the structure, but each time an encounter occurs, I'd like to suggest to you that there has to be a personal or relational connection. There has to be a point at which you look into someone's eyes and you connect with them. And you find out about that personal item that really was bothering someone last time we met. And not just as a box to check, but with sincere desire to know the person. Parker Palmer has a principle where he talks about that we are known, that we know to the extent that we are known. In other words, if I'm going to know someone, I have to be willing to be known. And as that dynamic liminal space develops, that knowing becomes a reality, and that relational connection happens. It doesn't occur incidentally. It happens when you intentionally choose to develop that relational connection. So I think every encounter has to have that personal relational encounter. There has to be a time for reviewing projects or situations that are currently in play. So, last time we talked about the difficulty in confronting some key leaders that have been creating some obstacles or resistance. let's check off. How is that going? What's going on with that? How are they doing? How are you doing? How are you responding? What have you learned from that? So reviewing current projects or situations in play. And then there has to be some time for new information or new factors. So what's changed since the last time we met? What's going on? Or what are the new challenges that you're confronted with, and how can we bring those into clarity and focus in what we're talking about? There also has to be time where you as a coach particularly can begin to tease out of that those principles that we've talked about already, the identification of principles to work on. And ideally, that's going to come kind of jointly. Let's talk about those. What are the principles that we want to derive from those circumstances, and how can you begin to work on those principles going forward and deepen your understanding, deepen your permeability to those principles? And lastly, every encounter, I think, should include high levels of honesty, needs to include prayer, encouragement, and next steps. Those are things that just come naturally. Those are some high-level, generic descriptors of things that might help you shape the process of how you go about building a relationship as a coach based upon some of the previous things under the priorities that I've already mentioned. So, coaching is a wonderfully challenging opportunity for every person. And it's a glorious time for mutual relationship building and for watching how God can use people in growth and in effectiveness in what they've been called to do. By way of synopsis, let me just read you briefly a statement that might help put it into perspective, and I think you can see this. Coaching is intended to assist leaders to discover next levels of development in both character and competence. Remember what I said about that. Rather than a prescribed curriculum that is imposed, seek first to understand both the leader and the circumstances, using the integration of both of those to nurture fresh thinking, deepened motivation, greater effectiveness, and heightened fulfillment along a personal path of leadership formation. I hope these thoughts have stimulated some of your own thinking. And if it has, may I encourage you to take time to either review this, to reflect upon this, to engage in dialogue with someone about some of these things, and to continue to take advantage of the resources that are being placed at your disposal in terms of next steps for being coached, next steps for becoming a coach, or at least even understanding the nature of coaching. May God bless you richly.